What a beautiful day today. The weather's looking good, there's a slight breeze so the sun doesn't get too hot, but unfortunately all these years of doing nothing but staying inside and playing video games causes me to burst into flames if being touched by direct sunlight. I'd go get that checked out, but going to the doctor requires going outside, and as we just established, that isn't happening. So like any self-respecting video game playing nerd loser who can't go outside, let's talk about a giant Japanese corporation. The company I was gonna make a video on is Maru-chan, but then I realized eating 6 servings of noodles in one sitting wasn't a viable option, so let's talk about the people who made Choo Choo Rocket instead. Sega, maybe you've heard of them, entered the console business, said that one didn't count, and then kicked Nintendo around for a few minutes before reality hit. They did arcade machines, indoor theme parks, partnered with DreamWorks to create some arcades that were announced to all be closing, I'm still sad about it, and somewhere in between made this Blue Rat, which is where my life started going downhill. We had a good run. Sega's definitely been around the block. In fact, in 2020, they celebrated their 60th anniversary. So for the birthday celebration, amongst the animated Sonic profile pics on Steam and special items in 2 Point Hospital, we got 4 exclusive games that were only available for a limited time before being delisted. I mean, you can still get them, but I'll talk more about that later. So I figured we'd talk about these 4 special releases because, let's be honest, if I don't, who else will? Each day, over the course of 4 days, there'd be one game released, and then it'd be delisted the day after the final game went live. So let's start with the start, and start with Armor of Heroes. Now, this game was the only one I had no clue about anything before looking into it. Apparently, this is based on the Company of Heroes games. What's Company of Heroes? That's a good question. These were real-time strategy games developed by Relic Entertainment, known for making Warhammer 40k, Company of Heroes, and pretty much nothing else. Also, apparently IGN gave him an award for Best Developer of 2006, so that's neat. Company of Heroes had games that were mostly received really positively, and then all of a sudden the series went on a nearly decade-long hiatus. This video took longer than you'd think to get out, so in my script I originally wrote down, I'm not a Company of Heroes fan, but for the people who do like it, I hope the new game that's coming out works good for them. But looking at the Steam reviews, I don't think it did. Armor of Heroes diverted from the real-time strategy genre and focused mainly on PvP tank battles, which for a game with a very limited digital release is hilarious. It also diverted away from the trend that Company of Heroes had going on where they made good games, because Armor of Heroes isn't that great if you ask me. I wouldn't be surprised if the 15 minutes of total footage I got of this game makes me the person with the longest playtime on it. So what is this game? Well, basically Wii Tanks, but for people who are clinically depressed. I'm not exactly familiar with tank battle games, in fact the only one I've played is Wii Tanks, but I'm not gonna let that hold me back from ripping into this one. Firstly, the controls in this game are really obtuse and hard to figure out, which is surprising. I initially wanted to play the game with a controller, but I swapped to keyboard and mouse because it doesn't explain to you which button does what if you use the controller. Even then, I still had to do a fair bit of button remapping to get something comfortable because the original control scheme of having your 2 aiming buttons right under the movement keys, who the hell thought that was a good idea? Also, there's only 3 tanks. There's the fast but weak one, the average one, and the slow but powerful one. Although I will say the average and slow tanks don't feel too far apart in speed from each other, and in a game where movement isn't a requirement, the slow tank's better health is basically a direct upgrade. We also have multiple game modes. You might think there's 9, but it's actually just 3 different game modes with 3 funny stipulations for each. The game modes are Deathmatch, where you get the most kills, King of the Hill, where you get points the longer you stay in the circle, and Survival, where you have a certain amount of lives and gotta be the last man standing. For some reason in the match I played in Survival, the red tank won, but in the ending screen it said everyone but the red tank won, which makes me wonder if this was programmed wrong or if the objective is to die first, which if so, that's dumb. The normal versions are the arcade variants, but there's also tactical and hardcore versions. Tactical is the same thing, just everyone's color is white now because the game's idea of increased difficulty is not letting you know who you're killing, and hardcore is the same as tactical, but now nobody has a color and you can't see your aiming line, as well as everyone dying in one hit. Hardcore is easily the dumbest since you can barely tell where your shots are going and the lack of a color surrounding the tanks makes it nearly impossible to see them sometimes, but with that being said, it definitely made things more fun. The chaos of everyone dying in 5 seconds and the dull colors on half of these maps making the tanks blend in may be objectively bad, but subjectively it turns this boring shitty game into a shitty game that might be fun and or funny if you stop caring. Also, let's talk about these maps, because that is definitely something that this game has. There's only 4 maps, which is pretty lame, and 2 of them have such a drab color palette that looking at them makes me feel like crying. These are the only 2 maps I like. The other 2 are snowy, which, yeah, makes things actually look nicer, but my god, why are these stages so huge? There's an entire county's worth of space between spawn points, and because of that, you spend more time trying to move yourself over to where your opponents are than actually fighting them, which gives more time for this game's terrible movement controls to sink in. The only map that's actually kinda decent is this one in the middle of a desert, because it has an actually appealing color palette and isn't gigantic, so it's a bit of a shame that I forgot to mention it originally. Here's the thing, I actually think that 3 game modes with 3 playable vehicles and 4 stages is a pretty decent quantity of content for a free limited time bonus game, which is something that I feel would hold a lot more weight if the game was actually fun. This feels like a bad game I would have gotten back in the day on WiiWare and is a rather sour and disappointing way to start up this lineup of games, so thankfully on the following day we get our next game, Endless Zone. This one's obviously based on Sega's Fantasy Zone series. These games were most popular in the arcades when the first game hit it big in Japan, and then got ported to everything they could get their hands on, even the NES surprisingly enough. Yeah, despite being known as a Sega franchise, Fantasy Zone was only published by Sega in Japan, meaning the US got an NES port, which is interesting. There were ports to the Master System, TurboGrafx, Game Gear, home computers, Wii Virtual Console, a remake on 3DS. It even got ported to my favorite console, Yakuza 0. There was also Fantasy Zone 2 and Super Fantasy Zone, but they seemed to really like the first game, I guess. While doing research for this, a lot of sources said the mascot guy for these, Opa Opa, is credited as possibly being Sega's first mascot, but I later found out that's actually wrong. Might as well slot this in here. Sega's actual first mascot was this fancy little rabbit named Professor Assobin. And I like this guy a lot, actually, but man, why did they only give him one pose? For God's sake, the only unique piece of art I could find of them was from Sega Hard Girls, and yes, that is something I just said, and is something that exists. Nobody be funny right now. I don't know what it is about Opa Opa, but I really like this little dude. If I don't get his figure in the Crane game, someone is gonna be gravely injured. However, this is actually a crossover game since this is technically a part of the Endless Space series. Even though Endless Zone takes more from the Fantasy Zone part for gameplay, while Endless Space is mainly the aesthetics. Speaking of which, the Endless games are a series of turn-based strategy games created by Amplitude Studios, who basically just make Endless Space games. There's been quite a few of these, starting in 2012, with the most recent entry being Endless Dungeon that comes out this year. While I have some experience with Fantasy Zone, I didn't even know Endless Space existed until this video. Similarly, while I hear people mentioning Fantasy Zone from time to time, nobody really talks about the Endless Space games. From what I can tell based on Steam reviews though, they seem well received, and I will admit, looking at the Steam images, they do seem kind of interesting, so I don't know, maybe in the future I'll actually check one of them out. Now, Endless Zone was pretty unsuspecting, but after getting to grips with it, I think it's actually a pretty fun time. It's a multi-stage space shooter with 4 stages, which is a pretty good amount for a limited-time free game. There's some small story to this. In the year of too many numbers, that starts with a 0 for some reason, a bunch of dead bodies popped up on the planet Menekul, and our player robot was blamed for some reason. Our robot pal decides he doesn't feel like being executed in the name of a cover-up, so he flees the scene in a spaceship. So here's the game. You traverse the area and need to blast all these orbs while dodging all sorts of other threats, and once all the orbs are dealt with, the boss shows up. Not gonna lie, this first level wasn't a great first impression. You're pretty slow to start and the enemies fly all over the place, Sometimes a lot of enemies will come to get you at once, and the projectiles you need to shoot out of the sky can be very small, and with your basic shots small size, even hitting normal enemies can be annoying. Gonna be honest, I was getting my ass handed to me for a while there, but this is actually where the short runtime of the game helps it. Since the early game is pretty difficult and there's only a few stages to run through, it encourages experimentation, mainly through the shop. The shops appear twice in each stage when you've cleared out 3 of the orbs, and then again before you destroy the last one. The experimentation mainly comes into play with the different weapons you can buy. I like swapping out shots based on what I needed at the moment, going between the wide one that fires in front and behind you, and the laser beam that destroyed some bosses. You can also get secondary weapons, and honestly I never switched this one off the default bombs, aside from occasionally using the missiles. The other big one is the engines that increase the speed of your ship, and you gotta get these as fast as possible, because the enemies only get quicker from here. Finally, you can get lives, which is also important because one tap is all it takes for you to spontaneously combust. So I mainly opted to pour my coins into them when I didn't have anything else important to buy. The game starts off hard, but eases up as you go on, which I say that, but I feel like generally the difficulty curve in this game is weird. The first and third levels are pretty difficult for much of the same reasons, small enemies that move around a lot, but even that isn't consistent because the boss for level 1 is piss easy, especially if you have the laser, and the level 3 boss is pretty hard since it seems the most like it wants to kill you with all the things going on screen at any time. But then, in the middle of these, it's broken up by levels 2 and 4 that aren't that taxing, and level 4 is just weird, like all these places have been alien planets, but then this is the white zone where you're attacked by shapes. The final boss is pretty easy too, you just blast these rocks that are bouncing off the screen edges, and that's the game over. And you know what? I actually had a pretty fun time with this game. It's pretty quality for a free limited time game. It's nothing mind-blowing, and if you know what you're doing, you can clear it out in less than half an hour. But I could tell I was having a good time when I got a game over and wanted to keep going at it to see if maybe this would be the run that I get through it. So, since Endless Zone set our hopes higher, I was particularly excited to get into the next game, Streets of Kamurocho. Now, this one is probably the game I was most excited to get into, as not only are Streets of Rage and Yakuza series I'm more familiar with, but I also think that mixing both these together can make for a fun time. I know I've been giving rundowns on the franchises represented in the 2 games prior to this, but that was mainly because I don't hear a lot of people talking about those series, so I figured it'd be nice to give a rundown, not just for people not in the know, but also to get the word out that they exist. But look, let's keep it real, I feel like a good portion of people know what Streets of Rage and Yakuza are, and if you want me to explain it anyway, then do you want me to chew your food up for you as well? I guess instead I'll go through my experience with their games, starting with Yakuza. This is a series I keep meaning to get into, but then other things just appear and then it gets knocked further down that totem pole. I mean, I own Yakuza 0, I've played a bit of it, and I still very much enjoy what I played, yet for some reason I haven't gotten back after enjoying it after it's been 2 to 3 years at this point. On top of that, all the new games look really cool, especially 7, so I really should start playing them. It's like I'm looking at all the kids having fun in the Yakuza playground from just beyond the fence, but the fence gate is open and nobody's telling me not to go in there, so I'm just standing here depriving myself for no reason. Streets of Rage, meanwhile, is something I have actually played, but I haven't checked out the new and fancy Streets of Rage 4, which looks super good by the way, but I do have a good bit of experience with the Genesis games. When I was younger, I remember playing a good deal of the first and second games on this little slab of disappointment. I guess I can talk about this for a minute, cause when else will I be able to? This is one of those consoles with Genesis games on them made by AtGames, the most hated company of every 40-something that exclusively plays retro games. Now, I will admit I haven't really bought a lot of their stuff, but from what I've seen, the hate on them is a bit overblown. While I do agree with the criticisms of them filling game space with generic crap no one cares about, and making systems with audio quality that can make a grown man weep, I also feel in some way you get what you pay for. A console made by a third party with around 50 games on it for 70-ish bucks. For that price point, it'll do the job and nothing else. That's pretty much how I feel about the handheld as well. It works, and it stops there. I'll give it some credit, it did introduce young me to a lot of classic Genesis games, and it was convenient to take on the go with me, although one thing that burned me is it didn't save data for the games on here, so I spent a lot of attempts trying to beat Wily Wars in one sitting. Though I guess nowadays none of this matters, because if you really feel like ignoring the millions of Genesis game collections that are out there so that we can own physical hardware, for $100 you can get the Genesis Mini that does what these consoles would do and better. Sorry, I got a bit off track there, but unless I have more money than I know what to do with and buy a bunch of at-games consoles for a video, this was my only chance to talk about it. Before we continue further, here is an impromptu segment called Hyper Experiences the Joys of the at-games handheld. Some Sonic. Jesus Christ. This goes against, like, everything I stand for. This is horrible. The point tally is loud enough to, like, kill a man, probably. Hitting the menu button, like, doesn't always want to take you back to the menu. Like, I have to really press down on it for it to work. Ah, yes, the wonders of the Genesis. Jax P. Oh my god, the shooting sound is so loud and crunchy. It sounds like I'm falling through an ice machine. Like I'm the ice cube. This is probably a bad time to say. I haven't played Vector Man in like 7 years. Let's play like one of the garbage knockoff games. They couldn't even get the sound good on their own shitty knockoff game. Like you did this one all on your own and you still messed it up. This is really embarrassing, but I liked Bomberman when I was a kid, so I would just play this. I would play like the garbage knockoff Bomberman instead of playing anything actually good. I'm pressing right so hard, but it does not want to take me there. Can we get that on the record here? This says 80 built-in games. And of those 80, so the tally's looking more like 40 built-in games you care about, and then 40 other ones we put in there for no reason. Okay, one last thing before the end of this. If you like hold this too tightly, then the thing like just fucks up completely. Like the easiest way to do it is just to press down on the screen a little firmly. The entire thing just turns off and turns back on again. I also found this out because I was reading the power switch wrong. And I thought it needed to go left to turn off when I already had it left. I went like too hard left. And then it just went white screen. And now I can't do anything and I have to turn it off. So that's pretty cool. I still stand by everything I said about these in the original recording, but it's maybe like a little bit shittier than I gave it credit for. Like I maybe could have been a little harsher, but that's of no consequence at this point. So it's fine. Anyway, back to what you actually came here for. This was the one I wanted to check out the most, and man is it disappointing. I mean, hey, I like the intro though, that's nice, we can pick our character. I decided to start with Kiryu, and jump right in. The game works just like classic Streets of Rage games. You can do a basic combo, walk into guys to throw them, do attacks in midair, pick up items for points and health, and grab weapons off the ground. Now, please understand something. Prior to recording gameplay for this video, I hadn't played Streets of Rage since I was a kid, so while I remembered the gist, the specifics were a bit hazy for me. Keep that in mind for a little bit later. For right now, though, I was enjoying myself enough. I mean, sure, picking up these swords and having them shift into traffic cones was weird, and the jumps are stiffer than steel lamp posts, but I can work with that. We have a couple mid-stage bosses with characters that are probably important, but as I said, I have still not played these, so I'll get back to you on that. We get to run through a bar and go back outside, fight one last boss, and that's the end of this stage, so let's move on to the next one. What? Yeah, so this is a funny bit. The game has one stage, and once you get to the end, it loops. I decided to mix it up and try out other characters. You can also choose to play as Majima at the start, and getting to the end once lets you play as Ichiban, but they all play the same. The repetition of playing as the same characters on the same stage just kind of feels like eating your third serving in a row of noodles. I don't want to do this anymore, and having to eat them so often has made the noodles start tasting horrible. Look, if you want to play this on repeat until the end of time, be my guest, but is it wrong of me to want more from this? Like, I know that these are limited time free games that are now delisted, but after coming off of Endless Zone, which I thought was a genuinely fun time, this is lame, I'm sorry. Like, how does this have less content than Armor of Heroes? That game sucked. But then I found out something I shouldn't have, something that nobody should know. I needed to record a Streets of Rage game, and feeling semi-nostalgic, I booted up the second game, only to discover a secret that's been covered up by the government for years. Streets of Kamurocho is a reskinned version of Streets of Rage 2. Please hold your appalled gasps. This whole game is the first level of 2 on repeat, and the character movesets, they all play like Axel. In the original game, each of the characters had their own movesets, and I get that those movesets were probably built off each of the characters' unique sizes and all that stuff. And here, all the characters are built relatively the same. But you know what? Why shouldn't Ichiban play like Skate? Like, come on, make this a little silly. It's a bit sad because this is the one I was looking forward to playing the most, and it just has nothing going on. What, do you want me to talk about the weapons and enemy types or whatever? Cause first off, even I'm not that desperate for a long video length, and even if I did, I'd just be inadvertently talking about Streets of Rage 2, so what would the point even be? I will say, I do like the sprite art. I think each of the characters look nice, and the locations strike a nice balance between the locations you'd expect out of Yakuza and the sprite art of the city in the original game. But that's really all this game has to call its own. I feel a little bad that I spent so much time pre-gaming this one, and then once I get into it, I have barely a page worth of script to say about it, but it's kind of hard finding things to say when I experienced everything this game had to offer in less than 10 minutes. You would have thought that being based on both one of Sega's larger series and one of their more iconic ones, this one would have had more effort placed into it, but not really, which is kinda sad. Anyway, we only have one game left to tackle, being based on another popular Genesis series, that being Golden Axe. Gonna be honest, Golden Axe never interested me personally. These are also a bunch of beat-em-up games, but they didn't have much style and always felt a little slow, which led me to playing Streets of Rage or Comic Zone for my Genesis beat-em-up fix instead. I remember playing a bit of the first game, but I never got far because it never really held my attention. All Golden Axe is to me is a really cool track in All-Stars Racing Transformed. This game is a little more interesting than the others though, and it has to do with the fantastic name, Golden Axed. What's that mean? Well, the game itself was axed. This is a prototype of a cancelled game called Golden Axe Reborn. It was going to be part of a Reborn project by Sega to make reboots of 4 games, Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, Altered Beast, and Shinobi. However, either fortunately or unfortunately, depends on your outlook of the thing, this whole initiative would be scrapped following the closing of Sega Studios Australia, and I guess this is all that remains. They warn of the game possibly having some bugs and being a little funky due to it being unfinished, though I never ran into anything personally, and we can dive right in. The consensus? Yup, it sure is Golden Axe. So, first off, add the opposite problem I had with Armor of Heroes in this game, where I could not for the life of me figure out what the controls were for keyboard, which is a bit annoying, since after using it for Armor of Heroes, I opted to use it for all the games after it. Using a controller did feel better, though I questioned putting the dash button on the right trigger, but whatever, for all I know this is a normal thing in the Golden Axe games, and I just never played them. So to start, you can do a heavy swing, and around halfway through the level I opted to only use the heavy, because the 3-hit combo it has can instantly kill pretty much every enemy that comes in your way. You can jump, do a mid-air swing, you have a run that lets you do a sprinting attack, pressing an attack button and jump at the same time has you do a turnaround swing, and yeah, that's about it. I pressed every button because I remembered the magic attacks you could do in the original Golden Axe games, but I guess that hadn't been implemented here. You sword slash your way through a few rooms until getting to this dude chilling on his throne while watching you beat up his guys, and then that's the game, wrapped it up in a concise, wow, 5 minutes. That went by quickly. I mean, I think it's alright. I chalk my indifference to me feeling that way about pretty much all of Golden Axe, but I don't think it's bad by any means, especially for a prototype of a scrapped game. On top of that, I just think that getting to play an official release of a concept for a game that never saw the light of day is really cool. That being said, I'm not a fan of something cool like this being restricted to a limited time release, like, come on man. Although there is a small bit of controversy surrounding this release, so I do want to talk about that. Pretty much all of this information comes from Tim Dawson's Twitter thread on the subject, so if you're interested, I'll have that linked in the description. So, apparently following the completion of a prototype for a remake of Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, the same team was set to make a prototype for an edgier reboot of Golden Axe. This isn't part of the original thread, but I wanted to interject with this. I wonder if the Castle of Illusion remake was related to the Sega Reborn project, considering the similar development teams, the fact it was a pretty popular Genesis game, like the other series set to be rebooted, and it was being made by Sega Studios Australia as well. I'm pretty sure it was even the last game they made before shutting down. Anyway, back on track. While making a Golden Axe game that was darker while also being faithful to the originals was hard enough, they were also given a meager 2 weeks to get the prototype wrapped up. And apparently, the lead of the project was even trying to have the Streets of Rage reboot made concurrently with the Golden Axe one, which would have been a recipe for disaster. Once an unfinished prototype was shown, the lead complained, get this, it wasn't like God of War, so things were going just great. And even though the prototype was smoothed out from there, it didn't go much further than that. This whole thing got brought up because the Steam page description decided to call it janky, buggy, and an artifact of its time, and knowing the story behind its failed development, yeah, that definitely comes off as in poor taste. So, yeah, fun and light way to end off this look at Sega's 60th anniversary, right? It might have been pointless to look at all these games given they're pretty polarizing and you can experience all of them in less than 2 hours, but hey, that just means everything went how I expected, like eating 6 servings of noodles. I thought it'd be fun to talk about these because it was a really weird and fun celebration for Sega's anniversary, and it seems like it's been pretty much forgotten in recent times, which I understand is because these games don't really have much depth to them, like you're not going to find any hardcore Armor of Heroes fans, but I still do think that they are something worth looking back on. On top of that, while Armor of Heroes wasn't good and Streets of Kamurocho was a bit disappointing, I did genuinely enjoy myself with Endless Zone, and I think Golden Axe to being released at all is cool. Now, if you watched the last one, please do, I'm desperate. I showed a fun little trick to download FNAF World on Steam, even though it had been delisted. Thankfully, this same trick can be used to download these games, even though they've been off the Steam store since the week of the promotion. So, if you want to check these games out, then plug this fun keyboard vomit into your browser, and have fun for like an hour. With that, I hope you enjoy the video, take care, and I will see you all later.